So this evening I wanted to bring up a Zen koan. So no great surprises there, I guess. Fortunately with Zen koan, there's many to choose from. I mean, well, depends on how you count it. Maybe 600 or 700 or something in our tradition. But different traditions have different systems of koan. So koan has a few ways that we could translate koan. Um, One is like public document. That's originally the root of where it comes from. Apparently, in in China, around in the Tang Dynasty and before, when the ruler would issue an edict, it would be written out so that everybody could see it, and put on a sign, and then at the entrance of the exit to the town of a community, it would be written and posted there. Right? So it's the old adage of ignorance is no defense in the law, right? So it's this thing would be posted so that word of mouth would go around, that everybody would know that this was the rule, this was the law. So koan has an implication of law, or just a fact, or a teaching. And of course, with Zen koans, they appear often to be uh, counterintuitive, or illogical, or very, very abstract. Right? Paradoxical statements, or statements that don't make any sense. Um, I used to wonder in early Dharma talks, when I'd hear like my teacher Tension talk, there were times where I would think to myself, why didn't he just sort of get to the point and tell us what he means, instead of, almost as if there's some kind of in joke, or a secret that's being talked around, that somebody's the keeper of the keys, and hey, come on, like maybe let us all in on the joke here, or on the secret. But of course, with more practice and more inquiry, something else became clear. We have, as human beings, a dualistic consciousness, right? The way that we navigate reality, the way that we understand people and things, is through a dualistic lens, right? Where self and other are separated. Some things are close, some things are far, some things are high, some things are low, right? We could bring up an infinite number of examples where we have this dualistic consciousness, which is most clearly perhaps seen in the sense of me, self, and the world outside. That can feel separated. Right? So koan is a state. Master Dogen would say koan is a statement from inside the principle. What does that mean? Inside the principle, it's a statement about reality, and it appears paradoxical because it's being produced from a non-dualistic insight. So, but without things distinguished or differentiated, a non-dualistic insight, it's an aspect of reality if it's being brought out in that way. So it becomes a stumbling block for a dualistic consciousness that is used to intellectualizing things and working things out in a logical manner. And over the years, over the months, the weeks, the years, brought up a lot of different koans. In my tradition, you study them one at a time with a teacher who's studied them before you. In that way, the tradition and also the standard of the tradition is maintained. But I was going to bring one up this evening, which is actually really quite a different kind of koan, and probably not talked about so much, this one, because it's a little different, because it has a story from a short story from Chinese folklore in it. Okay, so I'll bring it up, and it's case 35 from the Gateless Gate, and it's called Seijo's soul is separated. It's a little different right away because in Buddhism or in Zen, you don't hear much talk about the soul as something, right? So here though, this is Seijo's soul is separated. Goso, who's a teacher, asked a monk, Seijo and her soul are separated. Which one is the true Seijo? Okay, so Seijo and her soul are separated. Which one is the true Seijo? Okay, so we'll get into the story a little here. The story of Seijo comes from an old Chinese legend of the Tang dynasty. Once upon a time, in a state of Koshu, there lived an elderly gentleman named Chokan. Chokan loved his daughter Sei very much. She was very beautiful, and Chokan used to tease her when she was still a child, saying that her beauty was matched only by that of her cousin, the handsome Ochu. Just about the time that the two cousins realized that they were in love, Chokan announced his choice of another man as a husband for Seijo. So it was an arranged marriage. So you see some cultural differences as two cousins, which, that's not really like in Western culture, there's a little prohibition on that. But here in Tang Dynasty China, cousins are okay. But also, like, we have an institution of institutional marriage. Again, there's cultural differences. So just at the time the two cousins realized they were in love, Chokan announced his choice of another man as a husband for Sei. The young lovers were heartbroken. Ocho left the town and set off in a small boat. He had rowed a distance when he noticed someone running along the bank waving to him. To his great joy, he found out that it was Seijo, who had followed him. They decided to run off to travel to a far-off land and make a life together. A few years later, when Sei had become the mother of two children, she realized for the first time how deep a parent's love is. Her conscience began to bother her about the way she had treated her beloved father. Her husband also regretted what they had done to her father, suggesting that they return to their homeland to ask for his forgiveness. When they arrived in Kosu, Seijo remained in the boat while Ochu went to apologize to Chokan and tell him what had happened. The old man listened incredulously. Finally, he asked Ochu who he was talking about. The young husband replied, "Your daughter, Seijo." "But Sei never left home," the old man exclaimed. "Shortly after you went away, she became very ill, and she's confined to bed, and she hasn't uttered a word since you left." "You must be mistaken," Ochu replied. "Sei followed me. We've went off to a far-off country. We're married. We have two children. She's in excellent health. She wants to see you again and ask for your forgiveness for running away and marrying without permission. If you don't believe me, come down to the boat and see for yourself." The old man was reluctant, so Ochu went along to bring Seijo back to her father's house. In the meantime, Chokan went into the bedroom to tell the sick Seijo what had happened. Without a word, the invalid rose from her bed and rushed out to meet the approaching Seijo, and the two Seijos became one. Chokan said to his daughter, "Ever since Ochu left, you have been lifeless, as though your soul had fled." Sei told him, "I didn't know I was home sick in bed. When I heard that Ocho had left, I followed his boat as if in a dream." This is, and the teacher commenting here said, "This is the gist of the story. Now I'm asking the monks in this temple, these are the two, out of these two Seijos, which one is the true one?" All right, so as I said at the beginning, this is a little different departure with koan study, not a typical setup. This talks about an old Chinese folk story about the two Seijos who eventually become one. But the koan asks, and it says, Seijo and her soul are separated. So which one is the true one? So the koan in this case is asking that question. Which, which one of these two is the true one? Now, perhaps people would have believed in the veracity of this story many years ago. This would be, one of these folklores might have been taken quite literally. Our own culture, in our own cultural upbringing. I remember I grew up with. I was very fortunate in that I got into the Grimm's fairy tales when I was young. Although they were quite scary when you look back, like the things that happened in Grimm's fairy tales, or other things from fantasy. As I got older, I like to read a lot of science fiction, and I really enjoyed the Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and that whole universe, and always appreciated fantasy. And of course, just like with Aesop's fables and with Grimm's fairy tales, there's often a life lesson that would be hidden in those old stories. And when we look back in human history in many different cultures, fables, parables, and stories would be transmitted orally through the generations, told and shared around fires in homes to be able to entertain and to instruct. Imagine what an extraordinarily different world it was 1,000 years or more ago when this particular koan was taught. It was already an old story at that point. Now we have, sometimes I need to um, check into how many streaming plans I have, because my son loves, he's away at college, but he there's Netflix, there's like Amazon Prime, there's like, sometimes he wants to get HBO. It's called Max now, like, right? So there's there's like the internet is just massive in scope, completely huge in scope. You can go on a YouTube marathon, you can go down a Wikipedia rabbit hole, you can watch things at any point, you know. That's just the internet and that kind of entertainment. So there's so much content. We look back to an earlier period where, at this time of the evening, almost 5:30 in California, almost 6:30, and for those in Arizona, years ago you just turn in at this point, right? But like people would usually go to bed as soon as it got dark, and often just get up in the middle of the night for several hours, work, do different things, and then go back to bed. So the world has really changed. Again, in the story, there's some cultural aspects which are a little different. The obligation to fulfill our parents' wishes. Perhaps, I'm sure some of you, maybe all of you, or many of you, grew up with a sense of obligation to live your life in a certain way. Perhaps on a career path, perhaps all kinds of choices, and often and that really varies amongst families. It's like, I brought up my son just returned to college after being out here for a few days, and he's in a nursing program, and he never doesn't really know what he wanted to do, and so, but he got interested in nursing for different reasons. His aunt is a medical professional. My partner is a healthcare or social worker, so he's had some influence around that, and he decided this might be something he wanted to do. And I kind of encourage that because it's also quite lucrative. And hey, we're living in America and stuff's expensive. And if you come out of college, it's like, okay, we want to try and do it with like very minimal debt, and try and get a good job out of the gate and get set. So there's that shaping where I'm trying to, in my sense, aim him in toward something that I feel like would be a good thing for him to do, but then also conscious and when he has his doubts or goes into a place and decides he might want to do something completely different. Sometimes it's something that I think doesn't make a lot of sense. So there's that kind of push, pull, right thing where we're trying to influence and guide and model, but not dictate and control and condition. Right? So we're always we're living in that, and there's a broad range of interpretations of that. Back here in the Tang dynasty, marriages were arranged, and you didn't have a lot of choice growing up about what it is that you were going to do. Like in Japan, in the Zen tradition, in the Soto Zen tradition, most priests or Zen priests have a temple, and they live at a temple, and they have families. In Japan, priests are married typically and have families, and then usually it would be the eldest son is expected to take over the temple. The eldest son might want to do something different, but that's not really often it's not an option, depending on the family setup. And often, if you're the second or the third or the fourth son, you've got like decreasing options about what it is that you're going to do. You might have to completely. I'm no expert in this regard, but I've heard about this and talked to people who are in this position. Maizumi Roshi, who founded Yokoji, was born into a temple family with temple responsibilities, and his eldest brother took over the family temple. I think Maizumi Roshi was either the second or the third oldest brother, and headed out to America to, in one sense, to make his own way. So Seijo here had an obligation, just going to be married off to somebody else. But in that age-old story of what happens between people, things don't go to the script, and she falls in love with somebody, maybe not somebody who wasn't approved of. And then a decision is made to stay or to go. I'm sure many of us in our lives have maybe not exactly the same decision point, but we face those kind of decision points, right? Should I stay or should I go? Do I stay with this responsibility? Do I do sometimes what others expect me to do? Or sometimes it's, do I fulfill what it is that I'm obliged to do? Or I feel the responsibility, or perhaps we made a commitment to do? Or is there a decision to leave? Seijo in this case, the first Seijo, on the boat and off to a far off land, right, to start a new life, which I'm sure in that era wasn't easy. A far off land was probably not just so straightforward to be able to stake a claim and live a life. She takes off and starts a family, and this is where we get this split, and this is where the koan more comes to life. In our own mind, in our own life, do we not often live in a place of, I wish it was different. I wish it was different. I wish the circumstances were different. I do. If I put my hand up and I can cop to it and be honest. Another curious facet of this consciousness that we have is we're able to project different fantastical scenarios. We can project different options, like maybe I'll move to the East Coast, or maybe I'll move to Europe, go back to Europe. Sometimes my wheels will spin with maybe there's maybe there's a better life out there somewhere, right? Or maybe this isn't really working, and like, what is the next move? And then what are the options? And that's a natural thing, particularly when circumstances or there's difficulties that we're experiencing, and the life that we're living, it feels it doesn't feel consistent with what it is that we want to do. Again, I deal with that on a personal level with my son, where it's like he's still wanting to do what he wants to do. Like when I was in the UK, I started work when I was 16. So if that, and that feels wild now because I look back and I'm just like, wow, I've been working straight for 35 years, in what sense? Which feels like, I feel like I could already like sort of earned a little bit of a rest at this point, but I don't think quite yet. But in like when I grew up, nobody really talked about what it is that they wanted to do. There wasn't much of that. It was usually you just did what you needed to do, or in some cases, what you had to do. Right? There's some paralysis of choice that can come in where we have a certain standard of living, and then it's like, well, what is it that I want to do? And there can conversely be a certain comfort in having little choice about that. The 13th century Zen teacher Master Dogen would talk about another aspect of koan, which is to understand your role, right? To know who you are, or to understand who you are in this world, to know your role in this world. That is a difficult one culturally, perhaps for us in the Western Hemisphere more. There tends to be more pushback about like the role that we're in or what we're expected to do. But it can also be for many people or in different cultures, there can be a lot of refuge and comfort in really fully accepting the role and the circumstance of which they're born into and that they live in life. So it's not clear, that this is a better path. Seijo should stay or Seijo should go. Does she follow her heart and leave and cause a lot of distress to her family? I mean, that would be a big deal in those days. There's a lot of perhaps, they'd be considered dishonor or family shame in that, to disobey the parents and to just take off. So sometimes in life, whatever you choose, well, always in life, whatever we choose in terms of directionality, there's a cost. There's whatever positives that there may be on our trajectory, there's also negatives. Whether we stay in something, whether we go towards something, whether we make a change. Right? There's that old saying that the grass is always greener. I find that happening in my own mind when I project another world or another place, somewhere to live or something to do. I can find myself building a construction of all of the positives in comparison to the present negatives. Right? Because in the place that I stand, I can see positives and negatives. But when I project into the future, you don't see the negatives. Often you don't see the positives or the negatives clearly. So it becomes richer ground for fantastical projection. We imagine a land where things will be better, or a life will be better. So there's a cost when Seijo leaves, and there's also a cost if Seijo stays. We have the curious setup in the koan that there's actually two. There's some kind of split. This is we'll just take it as a fantasy story in this way. One does stay behind, but is miserable and unhappy and has really no will and no joy in life. Can't accept. And one that leaves, but always has remorse, always has guilt over the decision. So after these long years, it's a nice story in the sense that it has a happy ending. They decide to return, to face the music, and to beg forgiveness. And in the story, the two Seijos come back together, merge, and are one again. It's a nice story, but our life is quite different. Usually, we're living with something of a split in the same way Seijo was. The reality that we live, as human beings, we conspire to construct another reality that we prefer to move to. This really shows up. This can show up quite obviously and practically in our practice of meditation. We may encounter that basic resistance when we sit, that we would prefer to be doing something else. Now, I prefer to do other things and meditate. I don't look forward to meditation thinking, and this is for me, you may feel differently, but I don't feel like I love meditation so much I can't wait to get to the meditation time. If that was so, I'd be meditating a lot more than I actually do. I don't like to meditate. I like to do other things. Often that's things that, I like to, need to be taken care of. I like to be in action of responding to those things that need to be done. There's a sense of usefulness and purpose and flow that unfolds in that, which I find a lot of refuge in that. So I don't choose to meditate as this is really what I want to do. What I want to do and what's good for me, though, are often different, right? It's like what I would prefer to do and what actually benefits are often split. Like in the practice of meditation, in our sitting, if we really can occupy the seat fully, sit all of the way down, then we might be faced with Seijo's choice, right? Where in the mind, we start wanting to go up the river on the boat with the new guy or the new gal, or whatever the story in the mind is that wants to escape this experience of this moment in time because it's either dissatisfactory or feels boring and then we start to construct another place, or we're not happy or feel good in the place that we are when we're sitting, so then there's resistance to that. So that basic split of wanting to be somewhere else or rejecting the reality at hand is really at the heart of the human condition, and can really be experienced in Zazen and Zen sitting. That the experience of wholeness then, or of bringing these two parts together, bringing Seijo together, bringing each one of us together, that takes place in our sitting practice. Now, it's not a matter of now how do we bring that together? We might fall into an idea quite naturally that I shouldn't be thinking about somewhere or something else. That's how I heal the split. But that really isn't it. The way that we heal that split, or we cease splitting in that way, is to directly allow the content of our mind and the content of this experience to just unfold as it is. That can include daydream and flights of fancy, or flights of fantasy. There's nothing wrong with daydreaming or projecting ideas and fantasies. But in the practice of Zazen, in sitting and in present awareness, the difference is if we can just allow it, watch and experience, but not get involved, not add to the narrative, not call it good or bad, not trying to aim it somewhere and not trying to stop it either. Right? We are witnessing the unfolding of the self, ourself as we are. That includes all kinds of doubts, regrets, hopes, dreams, etc. that might be unfolding in the mind. But like I said at the beginning of the sit, Zazen or meditation is really declaring the unilateral peace that says, as this is internally and externally, however we're feeling, whatever the content of thought, whatever the circumstances around in the environment, just take no position there and call anything good or bad. Let go of the preference that's picking and choosing, the one that wants to stay home or the one that wants to get on the boat. To do so then returns us to the center of our experience. We can be at home with our own questing mind that is always looking for somewhere else to be. We can be at home in confusion or doubt, anger or fear. All of this rise and fall and churn of emotion and feeling. Right? Sitting down like the Buddha did, the practice of sitting, is not to judge or weigh any of the content. It is to sit still, to be at the still point. Right? Sometimes it's like a hurricane, like that. There's just this swirl of thought and feeling and emotion and difficulty, particularly if we're kind of amped up because something's really just going on. But like a hurricane, at the center, with a straight back and the breath, the stillness of mind is never absent, is always available. The way that's brought to the fore and brought into realization is to not be distracted or stained or touched by the content of our own thinking. Just let it unfold, let it play, let it be as it is. Then you can really sit. So on the face of it, it's an absurd question. Which one is for true Seijo? Is it option A or option B? Right? Like in Zen, often you'll see when asked a question, you don't have to take that question. You don't have to fall into the trap. Usually when asked if it's option A or option B, inside hint here, it's neither one. Is right? It's not in option A, it's not staying at home, and it's not in option B, or getting on the boat. But what is option C? Right? How is it if we just decide that this human experience, this challenging ups and downs and the difficulty of the human experience that we all of us without exception are experiencing, right? Perhaps option C there is to say this life, whether it feels split or not, this life as it is now, this is my life, this is it now. And if we can be at home and allowing and awake and aware in this experience now, that's all we need to practice. That's all we need to realize. Then we can be at home, awake to this experience when we're not meditating, when we're not sitting, when we're driving on the freeway, or we're late for work. Right? We're always going to be, as long as we're in this strange mystery of being a human being, there's always going to be the rising and falling of circumstances, hopes and regrets, loss and gain, love won and love lost. It's always been that way. It's just like the endless story unfolding. That the radical step, the art of meditation and of Zen, is to swallow it down all at once. To swallow it down, as it is. The whole thing. To say yes to this over and over. Yes to this. This may be difficult, but we say yes to the difficulty even. And then we find our way through it. And the gift of, with present awareness, our capacity for wise choice and appropriate action. That's what comes alive. Right? So if it's the tangible, or like what are the practical and tangible benefits of being so-called awake and aware, of practicing being present, it is to enter more closely the flow of life as it unfolds. You see it as it is. We're present, we're awake and aware. So that as these choices are being made, we can make them with naturalness and precision. And as constructions and fantasies are being cooked up in the mind, we can recognize them for what they are and either use them if useful or let them go if not. And be the true Seijo, the one who's always at home, whether home in bed sick or heading up the river on the boat. We're always at home. So, thanks for keeping me honest in my practice. The clock moves to 4:30, and then I realize it's time to practice. It's time to sit. It's time to walk it like a target, and give some time to a straight back and the practice of stillness. When I do so, the rest of my life is buoyed by that activity in a positive way. Just as simple and as elegant as that. But I know well that if I'm on my own, then often I find reasons not to. This wonderful practice is so helpful, but I do something else instead. And that's the power of the sangha and the power of a community. Right? And this can seem abstract, koan's abstract, the trappings of Zen or different traditions can be abstract, it can feel that way. But when you drill down and you practice, you realize, oh, this is taking an honest and truthful and as direct look as possible at the human experience as it is, without having to rely on a consensus narrative cooked up by somebody else. It's just this body, this mind now, looking at this as it is. And I've been talking for quite some time. I should leave some space for question, for any comments. It's a little unusual, this story. Perhaps there's some comment or any question at all. Anything that you'd like to share or ask, please feel free to unmute, to raise a hand, however you'd like to share, please feel encouraged. Well, thank you. Thank you for indulging a long tale from Chinese Tang China. I hope it was made a little relevant this evening for our own practice. Thank you, Mirasol, for opening and announcing and kindly reminding us in the chat of the essential way in which we can support the organization as a non-profit. So I appreciate that. And for all of the board members present and all of you, everybody who's here this evening, thank you for sitting with me and for showing up. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Maybe we could unmute and have the Hollywood Squares wave off before we depart. I hope you have a really nice evening, that you sleep well, you get a good rest.